The desert wind carried the scent of dust and distant smoke as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his night vision goggles and scanned the rocky terrain ahead. His six-man SEAL team had been operating in the mountainous region of Afghanistan for 3 weeks, tracking a high-value target known only as the Engineer. Intelligence reports suggested this man was responsible for designing the sophisticated, improvised explosive devices that had claimed the lives of dozens of coalition forces over the past 6 months. Morrison's team consisted of some of the most experienced operators in naval special warfare. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez served as the team's communications specialist and had been through 4 combat deployments. Petty Officer First Class David Kim was their explosives expert, capable of disarming the most complex devices the enemy could devise. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Tyler Brooks served as their medic, though his marksmanship skills rivaled those of any sniper in the teams. Petty Officer Second Class Alex Chun handled intelligence gathering and spoke 3 local dialects fluently. Finally, there was Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Sullivan, the youngest member of the team at 24, but whose natural instincts for tactical movement had earned him the respect of his more seasoned teammates. The mission had begun like countless others. Intelligence from multiple sources indicated that the Engineer would be meeting with local Taliban commanders in a remote village nestled in a valley approximately 40 miles from the nearest coalition forward operating base. The meeting was scheduled for the early morning hours, when the mountain passes would be shrouded in pre-dawn darkness, providing cover for the high-value individuals to move without fear of aerial surveillance. Morrison's team had infiltrated the area 3 days earlier, moving only at night and remaining hidden during daylight hours. They had established an observation post on a ridgeline overlooking the target village, carefully documenting the patterns of movement below. The village appeared to house approximately 200 civilians, mostly farmers, and their families who had lived in this isolated region for generations. The presence of Taliban fighters was evident from the weapons openly carried and the regular patrols that circled the village perimeter. On the second night of surveillance, Chun had intercepted radio communications confirming that the Engineer was indeed planning to arrive before dawn on the 3rd day. The intercepts also revealed that he would be traveling with a small security detail and carrying detailed plans for a new type of explosive device designed to target coalition convoys. The intelligence value of capturing these plans alive, along with the Engineer himself, could not be overstated. As the team prepared for the operation, Morrison reviewed the tactical plan with his men. They would move down from their observation post under cover of darkness, infiltrate the village, and establish overwatch positions around the target building where the meeting was to take place. Once the Engineer arrived and was positively identified, they would move in quickly to capture him before he could escape or destroy the intelligence materials he carried. The descent from their observation post proved more challenging than anticipated. The rocky terrain was loose and unstable, requiring the team to move with extreme caution to avoid creating noise that might alert enemy sentries. Each man carried over 60 pounds of equipment, including weapons, ammunition, communications gear, medical supplies, and specialized equipment for the capture operation. The weight made the treacherous climb down the mountainside even more difficult. Rodriguez had maintained constant communication with their Tactical Operations Center throughout the approach. The radio chatter from their headquarters indicated that other coalition units in the area were experiencing increased enemy activity. Several convoys had reported contact with small arms fire, and one forward operating base had received indirect fire from mortars earlier in the evening. The increased tempo of enemy operations suggested that something significant was planned, lending additional urgency to their mission. As they reached the valley floor, Kim detected the first signs that their approach had not gone unnoticed. Fresh footprints in the soft earth near a small stream indicated that someone had recently passed through the area. The prints appeared to belong to military-style boots, not the traditional footwear worn by local farmers. Morrison made the decision to alter their approach route, taking the team on a longer path that would keep them away from any potential enemy observation posts. The village itself was laid out in a typical pattern for the region. Mud brick buildings clustered around a central area where a small mosque stood next to a well that served as the community's primary water source. Narrow alleyways connected the various family compounds, creating a maze-like environment that could provide excellent concealment for a small team, but also offered numerous hiding places for enemy fighters. The target building was located on the northern edge of the village, a two-story structure that belonged to a local elder who was known to have Taliban sympathies. Sullivan took point as the team moved through the village outskirts, his natural ability to move silently through difficult terrain proving invaluable. Behind him, Brooks carried the team's medical kit along with additional ammunition for the squad automatic weapon that Chen operated. The weapon provided them with significant firepower but also made their movement more challenging due to its weight and the additional ammunition required. As they approached their planned positions around the target building, Morrison began to notice inconsistencies in the intelligence they had received. The building showed no signs of preparation for an important meeting. There were no additional security measures in place, no extra vehicles parked nearby, and no increase in the number of armed guards that would be expected for such a gathering. His combat experience told him that something was not right, but they had come too far to abort the mission based on intuition alone. Rodriguez established communication with their Overwatch element, a sniper team positioned on a distant ridgeline that could provide both reconnaissance and fire support if needed. The snipers reported normal activity in the village with no signs of the increased security presence that should accompany a high-value target meeting. However, they also noted movement in the surrounding hills that seemed inconsistent with normal pastoral activities. Kim had positioned himself with a clear view of all approaches to the target building, his explosive ordnance disposal training making him acutely aware of potential booby traps or improvised explosive devices that might be used to protect the meeting site. His careful examination of the area revealed several recently disturbed earth patches that could indicate buried explosives, but without more time for detailed investigation, he could not determine their exact nature. The planned meeting time arrived without any sign of the engineer or his security detail. Morrison faced a difficult decision. They could maintain their positions and wait to see if the target was simply delayed, or they could abort the mission and extract before daylight increase their exposure. The longer they remained in position, the greater the risk of discovery by enemy forces, but leaving without completing their objective would mean that weeks of preparation and intelligence gathering would be wasted. Chen's intercept equipment picked up radio traffic that suggested unusual activity in the area. The communications were coded, but the frequency and urgency of the transmissions indicated that something significant was occurring. His analysis of the signal strength and direction suggested that multiple groups of enemy fighters were coordinating activities in the immediate vicinity of their position. Brooks had been monitoring the team's physical condition throughout the long night of movement and positioning. The altitude and physical demands of the mission were taking their toll, but all team members remained capable of executing their assigned tasks. His medical training also made him sensitive to signs of stress or fatigue that might compromise their operational effectiveness, and he was concerned about the psychological pressure of remaining in such an exposed position for an extended period. As the first hints of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon, Morrison made the decision that would change everything. Rather than abort the mission, he chose to have Chen attempt to make contact with their intelligence sources to determine if the meeting had been postponed or moved to a different location. This decision required breaking radio silence and potentially exposing their position, but the value of the target seemed to justify the risk. The radio transmission lasted less than 30 seconds, but it was long enough. Within minutes of Chen's communication, the team began to notice increased activity in the village below. Doors that had been closed throughout the night began to open, and figures could be seen moving between buildings in a manner that suggested coordination rather than normal morning activities. The trap that had been carefully prepared was beginning to close around them. Morrison realized that their mission had been compromised from the beginning. The engineer had never intended to attend the meeting in the target village. Instead, the intelligence had been deliberately leaked to draw a coalition special operations team into a carefully prepared ambush site. The village itself had been turned into a killing ground, with enemy fighters positioned throughout the area and additional forces hidden in the surrounding hills. The team's training took over as they prepared for what was about to become a fight for survival. Each man checked his weapons and equipment, ensuring that ammunition was easily accessible and that communications gear was functioning properly. They had trained for this type of situation countless times. But the reality of being surrounded by superior numbers of enemy fighters in unfamiliar terrain was something that no amount of training could fully prepare them for. Rodriguez immediately began transmitting situation reports to their Tactical Operations Center, requesting immediate air support and coordinate rescue operations. The nearest coalition forces were over an hour away by ground, and helicopter extraction would be impossible until the enemy positions could be suppressed. They were essentially on their own until help could arrive. Sullivan had identified several potential fighting positions that could provide cover and concealment while allowing them to maintain fields of fire toward likely enemy approach routes. However, each position also had significant disadvantages, and it was clear that their current location was not suitable for a sustained defensive engagement. They would need to move, but any movement would expose them to enemy observation and fire. Kim's explosive expertise became critically important as he identified the locations of enemy-placed, improvised explosive devices that blocked potential escape routes. His quick assessment revealed that the enemy had spent considerable time preparing the ambush site, placing obstacles and explosives in locations specifically designed to channel any coalition forces into predetermined killing zones. The sound of weapons being loaded and the whispered coordination of final preparations filled the air as Morrison's team prepared for the fight that was about to begin. They had been through difficult situations before, but this felt different. The careful preparation evident in the enemy's ambush suggested a level of tactical sophistication that they had not previously encountered in this area of operations. As the sun began to rise over the Afghan mountains, painting the rocky landscape in shades of gold and red, the 6 Navy SEALs found themselves facing the greatest challenge of their military careers. They were outnumbered, surrounded, and far from any possibility of immediate assistance. Their training, experience, and brotherhood would be tested in ways that would determine not only their own survival, but also the success of future operations in the region. The morning stillness was broken by the distant sound of movement in the rocks above them, and Morrison knew that their time for preparation had run out. The first shots came from 3 different directions simultaneously, the crack of AK-47 rounds echoing off the canyon walls as Morrison's team dove for whatever cover they could find. The enemy had waited until full daylight to begin their attack, ensuring maximum visibility for their coordinated assault while denying the SEALs the advantage of their superior night vision equipment. Rodriguez rolled behind a large boulder, his radio already crackling with urgent transmissions as he attempted to coordinate close air support while simultaneously returning fire toward muzzle flashes visible on the ridgeline above. The Tactical Operations Center was responding to his emergency calls, but the nearest fighter aircraft were still 15 minutes out, and helicopter gunships would take even longer to arrive on station. Kim had found cover behind a collapsed section of stone wall, his explosive expertise allowing him to quickly identify which enemy positions were likely to have supporting weapons such as rocket-propelled grenades or mortars. His training told him that the enemy would attempt to use these weapons to flush the SEALs from their defensive positions, forcing them into the open where they could be more easily targeted by small arms fire. Sullivan demonstrated the tactical instincts that had earned him respect among his more experienced teammates, identifying a natural fighting position among a cluster of rocks that provided both protection and fields of fire toward 2 of the primary enemy positions. His movement to reach this position drew intense enemy fire, bullets striking the rocks around him and sending fragments of stone flying through the air. Brooks had established a fighting position that allowed him to provide both medical support to his teammates and accurate rifle fire toward enemy positions. His dual role as medic and marksman required him to constantly assess the tactical situation while remaining prepared to move quickly to assist any wounded team members. The weight of this responsibility was something that every SEAL corpsman understood and accepted. Chin's position provided him with the best overview of the battlefield, allowing him to coordinate the team's defensive fire while continuing to operate the squad automatic weapon that served as their primary source of suppressive fire. The weapon's sustained rate of fire was essential for keeping enemy fighters from advancing, but it also made his position a priority target for enemy marksmen. The enemy's tactical plan became clear within the first few minutes of the engagement. Rather than attempting to overrun the SEAL position with a direct assault, they were using coordinated fire from multiple positions to pin down the Americans while additional fighters moved to cut off potential escape routes. This approach demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that exceeded what Morrison had expected from local Taliban fighters. Morrison realized that they were facing a carefully planned operation that had been designed specifically to counter the tactics typically employed by coalition special operations forces. The enemy had studied their methods and developed countermeasures that turned many of their standard advantages into vulnerabilities. The high ground that would normally provide tactical advantage was being used against them, and their superior training and equipment were being neutralized by superior numbers and prepared positions. The radio traffic from their tactical operations center painted a grim picture of the broader tactical situation. Multiple coalition units in the region were reporting contact with enemy forces, suggesting that this ambush was part of a larger coordinated operation designed to stretch coalition resources and prevent rapid reinforcement of Morrison's team. The enemy had clearly invested significant planning and resources into this operation. Rodriguez's communications with air support revealed another complication. The proximity of civilian buildings in the village below meant that close air support options were severely limited. Fighter aircraft could provide reconnaissance and limited fire support, but the risk of civilian casualties prevented the use of larger ordnance that might be effective against the enemy positions in the rocky terrain. Kim had been carefully observing the enemy firing positions and noticed a pattern in their tactics that suggested professional military training rather than the typical guerrilla warfare methods employed by local insurgent groups. The coordinated timing of their fire, the discipline in their ammunition conservation, and the systematic way they were advancing their positions all indicated that these fighters had received advanced tactical training. Sullivan's natural tactical instincts allowed him to identify weaknesses in the enemy's assault plan. While they had successfully surrounded the SEAL team, their positions were also vulnerable to counterattack if the Americans could coordinate their movement effectively. However, any such counterattack would require leaving their defensive positions, exposing them to enemy fire during the movement. Brooks had already treated 2 minor shrapnel wounds among his teammates, using his medical supplies while continuing to engage enemy targets. The combination of his medical responsibilities and combat role required split-second decisions about when to focus on each task. His training had prepared him for this type of multitasking, but the intensity of the current situation tested his abilities to their limits. Chen's squad automatic weapon had become the focal point of enemy attention, with multiple enemy positions directing concentrated fire toward his location. The sustained fire was beginning to erode his rocky cover, and he knew that he would soon need to relocate to a different position. However, moving the heavy weapon would require assistance from his teammates and would temporarily reduce their suppressive fire capability. The psychological pressure of being surrounded and outnumbered was something that all special operations forces trained to handle, but the reality was always more challenging than any training scenario could replicate. Morrison could see the stress beginning to affect his team, not in terms of their tactical performance, which remained exceptional, but in the subtle signs that indicated they were all calculating their chances of survival. Enemy mortar rounds began impacting near their position, the explosions sending up clouds of dust and rock fragments that reduced visibility and made communication more difficult. The mortars were being fired from positions too distant for the SEALs to engage with their small arms, and the indirect fire capability gave the enemy another significant advantage in the engagement. Rodriguez had successfully established contact with a flight of F-16 fighter aircraft that were approaching their position, but the complex terrain and proximity to civilian areas meant that the pilots would need precise target identification before they could engage. This required Rodriguez to maintain constant communication while under fire, describing enemy positions and confirming that no civilians were in the target areas. Kim's explosive expertise became crucial as enemy fighters began using improvised explosive devices as offensive weapons rather than defensive obstacles. Several grenades modified with additional explosive material were thrown toward the SEAL positions, requiring quick identification and evasive action to avoid serious injury. His ability to recognize these devices and predict their effects was essential for team survival. Sullivan had identified a potential movement route that might allow the team to reach a more defensible position higher up the slope, but the route required crossing approximately 50 meters of open ground that was covered by multiple enemy positions. The movement would be extremely dangerous, but remaining in their current position was becoming increasingly untenable as enemy fire continued to intensify. Brooks was monitoring the team's ammunition consumption and realized that they would face a critical shortage within the next hour if the engagement continued at its current intensity. Each team member carried a basic load of ammunition, but the sustained firefight was depleting their supplies faster than anticipated. Resupply would be impossible until the tactical situation improved significantly. Shin had noticed that the enemy fighters were using a sophisticated communication system that allowed them to coordinate their fire and movement more effectively than typical insurgent groups. Their ability to shift fire between targets and coordinate simultaneous attacks from multiple positions suggested access to military-grade communications equipment and training in its use. The morning sun was climbing higher, increasing the temperature and adding heat stress to the other challenges facing the SEAL team. The combination of physical exertion, psychological pressure, and environmental factors was beginning to take its toll, even on these highly trained and experienced operators. Morrison knew that they needed to break the enemy's tactical advantage soon or risk becoming unable to execute the complex maneuvers required for survival. Air support finally arrived in the form of two F-16 Fighting Falcons, their presence immediately changing the dynamics of the engagement. However, the pilots reported that the terrain and civilian considerations severely limited their ability to engage the enemy positions effectively. They could provide reconnaissance and limited close air support, but the enemy's positioning made direct air attack extremely difficult. Rodriguez coordinated with the aircraft to identify priority targets while continuing to direct the team's defensive fire. The pilots confirmed that large numbers of enemy fighters were positioned throughout the surrounding area, with additional forces continuing to arrive to reinforce the ambush. The scope of the enemy operation was larger than initially assessed, involving dozens of fighters rather than the small group that had been anticipated. Kim had identified several enemy positions that appeared to house crew-served weapons such as machine guns or recoilless rifles. These positions represented the greatest threat to the team's survival, but they were also the most heavily defended and difficult to approach. Neutralizing these weapons would require coordinated effort and precise timing to prevent the enemy from shifting their fire to cover the threatened positions. Sullivan's observation of enemy movement patterns had revealed that they were attempting to position fighters for a final assault that would come from multiple directions simultaneously. This assault would likely begin within the next 30 minutes, based on the pace of enemy preparations that he could observe. The team would need to either break out of their current position or prepare for a desperate final defense. Brooks had prepared additional medical supplies for the casualties that would inevitably result from the coming assault. His medical training told him that the team's current defensive position would not provide adequate protection against a coordinated attack by superior numbers. They would need to move to better terrain or accept that their casualties would likely be severe. Chin's squad automatic weapon continued to provide essential suppressive fire, but the weapon was beginning to show signs of stress from the sustained firing. The barrel was heating up, and he was concerned about potential malfunctions that could occur if the weapon was pushed beyond its design limits. Losing their primary source of suppressive fire would be catastrophic for the team's defensive capabilities. Morrison faced the most difficult decision of his military career. He could order his team to attempt a breakout movement that would expose them to enemy fire but might allow them to reach more defensible terrain. Alternatively, they could remain in their current position and hope that air support could suppress enough enemy positions to allow for helicopter extraction. Both options carried significant risks, and the wrong choice could result in the loss of his entire team. The sound of enemy fighters moving closer through the rocky terrain was becoming more distinct, indicating that the final phase of the ambush was about to begin. Morrison made the decision that would define the next crucial hour of their lives. Rather than waiting for the enemy's final assault, he ordered his team to execute a tactical movement to higher ground, where they could establish better defensive positions and improve their chances for helicopter extraction. The movement would be dangerous, but remaining stationary would almost certainly result in their being overrun by superior numbers. The breakout began with Chun laying down sustained suppressive fire from his squad automatic weapon, while Rodriguez coordinated with the overhead aircraft to provide covering fire during their movement. The F-16s dove toward enemy positions, their cannon fire sending up clouds of dust and rock fragments as they strafed the ridgelines where enemy fighters had been positioned. Kim moved first, his explosive expertise allowing him to identify and avoid potential booby traps that the enemy might have placed along likely escape routes. His movement drew immediate enemy fire, bullets striking the rocks around him as he bounded from cover to cover, using the natural terrain features to mask his advance toward higher ground. Sullivan followed Kim's movement, his natural tactical instincts guiding him along a route that minimized his exposure to enemy observation while maintaining the ability to provide covering fire for his teammates. The enemy had anticipated their movement direction and had positioned fighters to intercept any attempt to reach higher ground, but the speed and precision of the SEAL movement caught them partially unprepared. Brooks moved with his medical kit and additional ammunition, his dual responsibilities requiring him to remain close enough to provide medical support, while also contributing to the team's fighting capability. His movement was complicated by the extra weight he carried, but his physical conditioning allowed him to maintain the pace required for the tactical bound. Morrison coordinated the movement while providing covering fire with his rifle, his leadership responsibilities requiring him to maintain tactical awareness of the entire team while engaging enemy targets. The complexity of commanding a small unit in combat while simultaneously fighting for survival tested every aspect of his training and experience. Chen's position with the squad automatic weapon had become the focal point of intense enemy fire, making his movement the most dangerous phase of the breakout. The heavy weapon required a sustained effort to move, and he would be unable to provide covering fire during his own movement. This created a critical vulnerability that the enemy was certain to exploit. The enemy response to the SEAL movement was immediate and coordinated. Additional fighters emerged from concealed positions throughout the area, and the volume of incoming fire increased dramatically. The enemy commanders had clearly anticipated this tactical response and had prepared positions specifically designed to interdict any attempt to reach higher ground. Rodriguez maintained communication with air support while moving, a challenging task that required him to operate his radio equipment while navigating difficult terrain under fire. The pilots reported that they could see enemy fighters moving to cut off the SEAL escape route, and they were engaging these positions as quickly as they could identify them without risk to civilian areas. Kim reached the first intermediate position and immediately began engaging enemy fighters who were attempting to flank the team's movement. His position provided good fields of fire, but it was also exposed to enemy observation from multiple directions. He would need to move again soon, but first he had to provide covering fire for his teammates who were still in the open. Sullivan had identified an enemy machine gun position that was causing significant problems for the team's movement. The weapon was positioned behind rocks that provided excellent protection, making it difficult for either the SEALs or the aircraft overhead to engage effectively. Neutralizing this position would require close assault, an extremely dangerous undertaking given the current tactical situation. Brooks had reached a position where he could observe the entire team and provide both medical support and covering fire as needed. His medical training made him acutely aware of the stress that his teammates were experiencing, not just from the physical demands of movement under fire, but from the psychological pressure of being surrounded and outnumbered. Morrison realized that their movement was being tracked by enemy observers who were directing fire from multiple positions. The enemy's communication system was allowing them to coordinate their response more effectively than the SEALs had anticipated, and this coordination was neutralizing many of the tactical advantages that normally favored special operations forces. Chen began his movement from the squad automatic weapon position, the most vulnerable phase of the entire breakout operation. Without his suppressive fire, the enemy immediately increased their rate of fire toward all SEAL positions, sensing an opportunity to inflict casualties during this critical moment. The success or failure of the entire operation might depend on the next 60 seconds. Enemy mortar rounds began impacting closer to the SEAL positions, indicating that the enemy forward observers were adjusting fire to target their movement routes. The indirect fire capability gave the enemy a significant advantage, allowing them to engage targets that were protected from direct fire weapons. The mortars were becoming increasingly accurate, suggesting experienced crews operating the weapons. Kim had identified the source of the enemy mortar fire and was attempting to direct airstrikes against the position, but the complex terrain made target identification difficult for the pilots. The mortar crew was positioned in a deep ravine that provided protection from aerial attack, while allowing them to fire at high angles toward the SEAL positions. Sullivan made the decision to assault the enemy machine gun position that was preventing their movement to higher ground. This action required him to leave the relative safety of his current position and advance across open ground toward a well-defended enemy position, but the machine gun had to be neutralized if the team was to have any chance of reaching better terrain. Brooks had prepared to provide medical support for the casualties that would likely result from Sullivan's assault on the machine gun position. His medical supplies were organized for rapid access, and he had identified the best routes for reaching wounded teammates while remaining as protected as possible from enemy fire. Rodriguez continued coordinating with air support while engaging enemy targets, the demands of his multiple responsibilities stretching his capabilities to their limits. The pilots were reporting fuel concerns that would force them to return to base soon, potentially leaving the SEAL team without air support during the most critical phase of their breakout attempt. Morrison watched Sullivan begin his assault on the enemy machine gun position, knowing that the success of this individual action could determine the survival of the entire team. The leadership burden of making decisions that risked his subordinates' lives while offering the only hope for collective survival was something that no training could fully prepare any commander to handle. Chen had successfully reached a new firing position and was re-establishing suppressive fire with his squad automatic weapon, but the movement had cost precious time during which enemy fighters had been able to advance closer to the SEAL positions. The enemy was systematically reducing the space available for the Americans to maneuver, slowly tightening the trap that had been carefully prepared. Sullivan's assault on the machine gun position required him to advance up a steep slope covered by loose rocks that made silent movement impossible. His approach drew immediate enemy fire from multiple positions, but his tactical training and natural instincts allowed him to use the terrain features to minimize his exposure while continuing to advance toward his target. The enemy machine gun crew had identified Sullivan's approach and was attempting to traverse their weapon to engage him, but the limited arc of fire from their prepared position prevented them from bringing effective fire to bear on his advance route. This limitation in their defensive preparation created the opportunity that Sullivan was exploiting, but it also meant that other enemy positions were focusing their fire on his movement. Brooks had moved to a position where he could observe Sullivan's assault and provide covering fire while remaining prepared to move forward with medical assistance if needed. The combination of his medical responsibilities and combat role required constant assessment of the tactical situation and split-second decisions about when to focus on each task. Kim was engaging enemy positions that were attempting to support the machine gun crew by firing on Sullivan's advance. His marksmanship skills were being tested by the need to engage multiple targets at extended ranges while under fire himself. The accuracy required to engage enemy fighters who were partially concealed behind rocks demanded the highest level of shooting skill. Rodriguez had received word that additional air support was en route, but the aircraft currently on station were reaching their fuel limits and would need to depart soon. This meant that there would be a gap in air support coverage during which the SEAL team would be entirely dependent on their own capabilities for survival. Morrison was coordinating the team's fire to support Sullivan's assault while simultaneously planning their next movement phase. The leadership demands of tactical combat required him to think several steps ahead while responding to immediate threats, a mental challenge that tested every aspect of his training and experience. Chen's squad automatic weapon was providing essential suppressive fire, but the sustained firing was causing the weapon to heat up beyond normal operating parameters. He was concerned about potential malfunctions that could occur if the weapon was pushed too hard, but the tactical situation required maximum suppressive fire to support Sullivan's assault. Sullivan reached grenade range of the enemy machine gun position and prepared to engage with explosive ordnance that would neutralize the weapon crew. This phase of his assault was the most dangerous, requiring him to expose himself to enemy fire while preparing and throwing grenades with precision that would ensure effective engagement of the target. The enemy had recognized the threat that Sullivan's assault posed to their tactical plan and was directing increasing amounts of fire toward his position. Multiple enemy fighters were attempting to engage him simultaneously, creating a concentrated volume of fire that made his continued advance extremely dangerous, but also indicated the importance of his target. Brooks had identified the location where Sullivan would most likely need medical assistance if he was wounded during his assault, and he was prepared to move forward rapidly to provide aid. His medical training told him that any wounds sustained during the assault would likely be serious, given the intensity of enemy fire directed towards Sullivan's position. As Sullivan prepared to throw his first grenade toward the enemy machine gun position, a single shot rang out from an unseen ridge, changing everything in an instant. The shot from the unseen ridge struck the enemy machine gunner directly in the head, sending his body tumbling backward into the rocky position as his weapon fell silent. Sullivan froze momentarily, his grenade still in hand, as he tried to identify the source of the shot that had just eliminated his primary target. The angle and precision of the shot indicated a skilled marksman positioned at considerable distance, but no coalition forces were supposed to be operating in this area. Morrison immediately recognized the implications of this unexpected development. Either they had friendly forces in the area that had not been briefed to them, or enemy fighters were engaging each other for reasons that he could not immediately understand. The tactical situation had just become even more complex, with unknown factors that could either help or hinder their escape from the ambush. Rodriguez was frantically attempting to establish communication with any coalition units that might be operating in their area, but his radio calls were going unanswered. The Tactical Operations Center was reporting no friendly forces within range to provide the kind of precision fire that had just eliminated the enemy machine gunner. This meant that either their intelligence was incomplete or something entirely unexpected was occurring. Kim had observed the muzzle flash from the distant ridge and was attempting to identify the shooter using his optical equipment. The distance was considerable, well beyond the effective range of typical infantry weapons, suggesting that whoever had taken the shot was using specialized equipment and possessed exceptional marksmanship skills. The precision required for such a shot under combat conditions was remarkable. Chun continued providing suppressive fire with his squad automatic weapon, but he was also scanning the distant ridge lines for any sign of additional friendly forces. His position provided him with the best overview of the surrounding terrain, making him the most likely team member to spot any other coalition forces that might be operating in the area. Brooks had prepared to move forward to assist Sullivan, but the unexpected elimination of the enemy machine gun position had changed the tactical situation dramatically. Sullivan was no longer in immediate danger from that particular threat, but the source of the supporting fire remained unknown, creating new uncertainties about the overall tactical picture. Sullivan took advantage of the confusion among the enemy forces to advance further up the slope toward a more defensible position. The elimination of the machine gun had created an opportunity that he was not going to waste, regardless of who had provided the supporting fire. His tactical instincts told him to continue moving toward higher ground while the enemy was disorganized. The enemy fighters were clearly confused by the unexpected loss of their machine gun position. Radio chatter increased dramatically as they attempted to determine whether they were facing additional coalition forces or if one of their own positions had mistakenly engaged the machine gun crew. This confusion was disrupting their coordinated assault plan and providing the SEALs with a temporary tactical advantage. Morrison made the decision to continue their movement toward higher ground while the enemy was disorganized, but he also directed Rodriguez to maintain constant communication attempts to identify any friendly forces that might be providing support. The unknown factor represented both an opportunity and a potential threat that had to be carefully managed. Kim had identified several additional enemy positions that were vulnerable to long-range precision fire from the mysterious marksman, and he was attempting to predict which targets might be engaged next. His explosive expertise gave him insights into which enemy positions posed the greatest tactical threats, would therefore be the most logical targets for elimination. Chin's squad automatic weapon continued to provide suppressive fire, but he was conserving ammunition more carefully now that the immediate pressure from the enemy machine gun had been eliminated. The weapon was still showing signs of heat stress from sustained firing, and he was concerned about potential malfunctions that could occur if he continued pushing it beyond normal limits. Brooks had reached a position where he could observe both Sullivan's continued advance and the ridgeline where the mysterious marksman was located. His medical training made him aware of the physical and psychological stress that unexpected developments could create, and he was monitoring his teammates for any signs of confusion or tactical hesitation. Rodriguez finally received a response to his communication attempts, but it came from an unexpected source. A voice with a slight accent identified himself as Overwatch 6 and stated that he was providing precision fire support for their extraction. The voice was calm and professional, but it was not using standard coalition radio procedures or call signs. Sullivan had reached a position where he could observe the village below and the surrounding terrain more clearly. From this vantage point, he could see that the enemy had positioned significantly more fighters throughout the area than they had initially assessed. The scope of the ambush was larger than anyone had realized, involving what appeared to be company-sized enemy forces rather than the small group they had expected. Morrison attempted to establish direct communication with the mysterious Overwatch 6, but the radio transmission was weak and intermittent. The voice confirmed that he was observing their tactical situation and would continue providing precision fire support, but he provided no information about his identity or mission authorization. This created a command and control problem that Morrison had no precedent for handling. Kim had identified the most likely position for the mystery marksman based on the angle of the shot that had eliminated the machine gunner. The location appeared to be approximately 800 meters away on a ridge that provided excellent observation over the entire area, but would require exceptional skill to reach undetected. Whoever was providing the support had invested considerable effort in positioning himself for the engagement. Shin observed additional enemy fighters moving through the village below, apparently attempting to establish new positions that would allow them to continue the ambush despite the loss of their machine gun crew. The enemy's tactical flexibility and ability to adapt to changing circumstances continued to demonstrate a level of sophistication that exceeded normal insurgent capabilities. Brooks was monitoring the team's ammunition status and realized that the unexpected pause in intensive combat had given them an opportunity to redistribute ammunition and conserve their remaining supplies. However, they were still significantly outnumbered and would need to reach an extraction point soon or face exhaustion of their combat supplies. The voice of Overwatch 6 came through the radio again, providing detailed information about enemy positions and movements that he could observe from his elevated position. His descriptions were accurate and tactically useful, but the fact that he was operating independently of any known command structure continued to create uncertainty about his identity and objectives. Rodriguez was coordinating with the F-16s overhead, which were running low on fuel and would need to depart soon. The pilots confirmed that they could observe the enemy forces that Overwatch 6 was describing, lending credibility to his reports, but they had no information about any coalition sniper teams operating in the area. Sullivan had advanced to a position where he could provide overwatch for his teammates' continued movement, but he was also attempting to identify the location of the mysterious marksman who had provided the crucial supporting fire. His tactical training told him that they needed to link up with any friendly forces in the area, but he was also aware of the possibility that this could be some kind of elaborate trap. Morrison faced another difficult command decision. He could attempt to make contact with Overwatch 6 and potentially compromise both his team and the unknown supporter, or he could continue their planned extraction without attempting to coordinate with the mystery marksman. Either choice carried significant risks, but the continued enemy pressure meant that any decision had to be made quickly. Kim had noticed that the enemy's tactical coordination was breaking down following the loss of their machine gun position and the apparent presence of additional coalition forces. Their radio communications were becoming less disciplined, and their movement patterns showed signs of confusion and uncertainty. This degradation in enemy capabilities provided an opportunity that needed to be exploited quickly. Chun repositioned his squad automatic weapon to provide better coverage of the team's continued movement toward higher ground. The weapon was still functional despite the heat stress from sustained firing, but he was carefully monitoring its condition to prevent any malfunctions that could occur at a critical moment during their extraction. Brooks had prepared additional medical supplies for rapid access during their continued movement, and he was monitoring his teammates for any signs of wounds or stress that might compromise their ability to reach the extraction point. His dual responsibilities required constant assessment of both medical and tactical factors that could affect the mission outcome. A second shot from Overwatch 6 eliminated an enemy forward observer who had been directing mortar fire toward the SEAL positions. The precision of this shot, like the first, was remarkable, and it immediately reduced the indirect fire threat that had been one of the enemy's primary tactical advantages. The elimination of the mortar spotter would significantly improve their chances of reaching an extraction point. Rodriguez received confirmation that helicopter extraction assets were en route and would arrive at their location within 20 minutes, but the landing zone would need to be secured against enemy fire before the aircraft could safely approach. This meant that the team would need to continue fighting while moving toward the extraction point, a challenging tactical requirement given their ammunition constraints. Sullivan had identified a route toward higher ground that would provide both better defensive positions and a suitable landing zone for helicopter extraction. However, the route required crossing several areas that were still covered by enemy fire, and the movement would need to be carefully coordinated to prevent casualties during the final phase of their escape. Morrison made the decision to trust Overwatch 6 and coordinate their extraction movement with his supporting fire. The unknown marksman's accurate intelligence about enemy positions and his demonstrated precision in eliminating key threats made him a valuable ally, regardless of his identity or authorization status. The immediate tactical situation took precedence over administrative concerns about command relationships. Kim began coordinating target priorities with Overwatch 6, identifying enemy positions that posed the greatest threat to their extraction movement. His explosive expertise allowed him to assess which enemy capabilities needed to be eliminated first to ensure successful movement to the landing zone, and the precision marksman was in an ideal position to engage these priority targets. Chun prepared to provide moving suppressive fire during their advance toward the extraction point, but he was carefully managing his ammunition to ensure that he would have sufficient rounds available for the final defensive phase when the helicopter arrived. The squad automatic weapon would be essential for protecting the aircraft during landing and takeoff operations. Brooks had organized his medical equipment for rapid deployment during the extraction phase, knowing that helicopter operations under fire often resulted in casualties that required immediate medical attention. His preparation could mean the difference between life and death for any team member who was wounded during the final phase of their escape. As Morrison signaled for the beginning of their final movement toward extraction, another shot from the mysterious marksman eliminated an enemy rocket-propelled grenade operator who had been positioning to engage the incoming helicopter. The precision and tactical awareness demonstrated by Overwatch 6 continued to provide crucial support that was enabling their successful escape from what had initially appeared to be an impossible situation. The sound of approaching rotors began to echo off the canyon walls as their extraction aircraft approached the designated landing zone, marking the beginning of the final phase of an operation that had tested every aspect of their training, experience, and brotherhood in ways they would never forget.